A college football expert really makes the case for Auburn having one of the best receiving corps in all of college football.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. We're dapping it up with the Darrell Dapprich. He's back. He's healed. He's ready to rock and roll. Auburn basketball takes on Arkansas late this evening. We'll touch on that later in the show, as well as where does Malcolm Simmons fit into this offense, because we're starting things off with a friend of the program, Max Chadwick, over at Pro Football Focus, put together a list of the top 10 returning wide receivers in college football. And Darrell, we need to pause for a second, because of the top 10 returning wide receivers in college football, Auburn has 2 of them, according to PFF's Chadwick. Cam Coleman is ranked 6th on this list, and Eric Singleton is ranked 5th on this list. What a world we get to live in right now.
Man, that's exciting. It's hard not to overhype that, and I know you want to stay level-headed and stuff like this, but
sure.
I think about where Auburn has come from in the last 2 years in regards to the wide receiver room. And to think that in just 2 years, you go from what Auburn had 2 years ago and how they struggled. I'm not even going back to the Harsin year. I'm talking about what Hugh Freeze had to run out there his first year.
Sure.
To go from that to having 2 of the top 10 someone ranking that in the country returning is incredible. And I think that that's something that's really, really special. It should make Auburn fans really excited and anticipatory about what's coming up. And it should make the Auburn quarterback room even more giddy, because obviously, Zach, if you find the right guy that can spin it and get the ball to these receivers, you're talking about having a much more prolific offense. It's there for the taking, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, I got a feeling over the course of the offseason, we're going to have a similar conversation that we had last year. I mean, the narrative last year was like, can Peyton Thorne just be okay? Can he just be average? And I guess we should have been more specific, because I do think he was fine. I think the scheme in the red zone and on third downs, I think just really fell apart. Some people think that was quarterback play. I'm more in the camp that I think it was scheme and play calling. And so, we get to have that debate. But one thing is for certain, and we could say this from Hugh Freeze's first year to his second year, that playing quarterback at Auburn got significantly easier from year 1 to year 2 for Peyton Thorne. And now, I think with the pieces around, we assume Jackson Arnold at offensive line and at wide receiver. I want to see a little bit more at tight end than at running back, but I think it's all going to be fine. This should be the easiest it's ever been to play quarterback at Auburn with all of these weapons around you.
You make 2 really good points that I want to revisit. Number one, I don't think, Zach, that Keandre Lambert-Smith could have had the kind of year he had last year if at least at the very minimum Peyton Thorne didn't play average. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I think that, yeah, he didn't reach the heights and the goals, and there were some mistakes, but overall it was average, or there's no way a receiver has that kind of year. It's physically impossible. We've seen that in the past with poor quarterback play. Second of all, you mentioned the offensive line, and I know we're talking about receivers, but when we threw the quarterback conversation in there, that's what I think is key too, is you can have phenomenal receivers that can get open all day long, but if you ain't got time to get them the football, it's not going to matter. Or if you do have time to get them the football and it's a quarterback that holds on to the ball too long or makes poor decisions or is inaccurate, it's not going to matter. So is this the year that it's the perfect storm, that all 3 of those come together? And if the offensive line is what I think it is, and if these receivers are what we think they are, all Jackson Arnold has to do is not be stupid with the football. He can be just solid. That's it, just solid, and it could be a special offensive year.
You've got the pieces. You've got the situation. if you're Jackson, I think Jackson Arnold and Hugh Freeze are kind of in similar situations. They both kind of got one more shot, it feels like, to where the perception of them just a few years ago was way higher than it is now. And they're kind of teaming up and they're saying, this is the time we're going to do it together. I think it's great. I honestly think it's great for both of them because there's so much at stake. They both understand where the other one's coming from. Like I do like the dynamic there. But once again, and you just hinted at it, like Jackson Arnold doesn't have to be a top 3 quarterback in the conference. But does he have to be better than maybe he should be to overcome potential questions regarding the scheme in, big plays and in big areas of the field next year? Right? To me, that's going to be my biggest question. I get so many negative comments that talk about like, oh, okay, you guys get on here and hype all of these players up. And then like right now, if I had to pick, I would say Auburn goes 7-5. I think you're one ahead of me. You're 8-4, right?
Absolutely.
Right now. Yeah. So, I mean, we're one game off and it's like, oh my goodness, you're picking Auburn to go 7-5 and you're hyping all these guys up. And it's like, it's not the roster. The roster is not my concern anymore. I've got a few spots where like, I need another interior D lineman. I'd like another linebacker. I need to see the tight ends over the course of spring, but I think the talent is there. I think running back should be fine. I want to see ball security out of a few guys, but it should be fine. I think you can get hype up these players and still say, no, Hugh Freeze or whoever's calling plays this year, we assume it's Hugh, like they need to do more. You have one of the best receiving corps in college football, not the SEC, in college football. It's time. It's time to score more points, Hugh Freeze. And I don't think anybody should push back against that.
No, because you could have execution between the 20s and have a prolific offense that pads stats. But if you don't do what you just said and finish out the execution by scoring points, it doesn't matter. And that's where Auburn was lacking last year. I also want to say this. When you talk about Jackson Arnold just not having to be great, I do believe he has to be better than some of these preseason predictions have him. I don't think that Auburn gets where they need to get or where they need to be if he's the 12th best quarterback in the SEC, right? Mm-hmm. I think if he gets to 7th or 8th, they can. And I think there's no excuse not to with the receivers now, obviously, and the weapons he has around him and the running backs. That's why I have been adamant saying he has been very, very underrated in those rankings, and I think he's going to be better. It's because I think he's going to have more weapons that makes him better. So, yeah, if he's the 12th or 13th best quarterback in the league, it's going to be tough to meet those goals offensively and execute like you're talking about. Just get to 7th or 8th, and you'll see what kind of wonders that does.
Yeah, especially with what we think the defense can accomplish, assuming they dress up a few of those spots, which I think that they will. I've got a question I want to ask you that I have a hard time answering myself. I'll take a stab at it. I'm going to ask you to take a stab at it. And I also want you guys watching and listening to take a stab at it. That's next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at TurboTax. Darrell, it's tax season. Taxes we know is, stressful. There's so much to worry about. You use TurboTax. It seems like everybody that comes on this show uses TurboTax, and it's made your life during tax season way easier.
Full disclosure, my wife does our taxes, and she does it because she can use TurboTax. She's not an accountant, but that's how simple it is, and she did them last week. There we go. We've been a TurboTax customer for a very, very long time.
Yeah. Now this is taxes with Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only available in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantee. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. I want to talk about how Malcolm Simmons fits into this wide receiver room, but first I got to ask you, with all this excitement about Eric Singleton, which we really didn't talk about much this past segment, is he an upgrade over Keandre Lambert-Smith?
Wow. I can see why you wanted my raw reaction. Yes, barely. And for one reason.
Yeah.
And one reason only. Okay. Speed.
He's fast.
Keandre Lambert-Smith did not come to Auburn as a bona fide number one. including all your Penn State talking heads and everybody, the one that I interviewed. But he ended up being that at Auburn. Now, was that by default because what Auburn had in the receiving room? I don't know. Eric Singleton comes to Auburn as a bona fide number one from where he left at Georgia Tech. That's the first differentiator. The second is Keandre Lambert-Smith was a polished route runner. He was a seasoned veteran. He had experience. But Singleton has something that's not in a stat book or a playbook, and that's God-given, and that's just game-breaking speed. Don't get me wrong, Keandre Lambert-Smith was talented as crap and made some acrobatic, great catches. But I think the only reason why I think it's a slight upgrade is he's already used to wearing that number one mantle, and number two, he has that different speed. That, man, it's a cliche, but you can't teach it.
I agree with you, but I feel bad saying it.
Oh, I feel horrible saying it. I feel horrible saying it.
I do think, like, if I had to pick between one of them, like, I think I like Singleton more. I tell you what, I definitely, the combo of Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton this year, I do think will be better than the combo of KLS and Cam Coleman last year, but that's not all on KLS. If you do a direct comparison between the two, it's tough, but I do think I give the slight edge to Eric Singleton Jr., which should excite everyone. I think there's going to be a good bit of people that disagree with that, but I don't know. I think Singleton can do more too, and some of that has to do with the speed that you mentioned, but like I'd feel more comfortable putting him at the slot if you wanted to give Perry some reps in certain situations, or in goal line if you want more big bodies on the field or something like that. Like, I do think he offers more positional versatility. Not that you really need it because you have so many guys in that room, but if that's something that they wanted to do, and I also think it's going to be a major issue when he and Malcolm Simmons are both cooking at the same time. And then you also have Cam Coleman that you have to worry about. Like, as a defense, that's just a lot. That's a lot that you have to focus on.
Couple things. Number one, Singleton may be an upgrade and still end up with less statistics as far as than KLS because of the emergence of Simmons and Coleman, I think, having better years.
Sure.
So don't let that get caught in the weeds that you go, well, looking back on it, KLS did have better statistics. Well, that's because I think Coleman and Simmons are going to take a jump. Also, I think, obviously Cam Coleman has really, really sticky fingers and made some great catches. But in this process, you do want a possession type receiver. Speed is great. Stretching the field is great.
Sure.
Where do you go on 3rd and 7 on a dig route or a hook route over the middle where you got to have it and he's going to get blasted? So is that Singleton? Does Coleman?
I think that's Coleman.
That road? Yeah. So and he's big enough and can shield defensive back. So that's one other area that, if you got 3 burners, I get it, but you better have somebody that can catch it on 3rd and 8 in traffic over the middle. KLS showed he could do that to the sideline. He made incredible toe tapping to the sideline catches
all year. He
was a possession dude. You threw it to him and his catch radius, and it was there.
Mm-hmm.
But wasn't it nice last year to see so many less drops? That's one thing we kind of take for granted. 2 years ago, there were so many drop balls, and that was one of the reasons that Peyton Thorne got a little bit of a pass. He did have a lot of drop balls, but last year there wasn't. I mean, people pretty much in that area, other than the tips that went for interceptions, that, by the way, ironically, was Cam Coleman, this needs to get cleaned up. I think it was much better.
It just seemed like the drops were a lot more costly this past season when that happened, just because they turned into picks.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I'm trying to pull that up real quick, what the drops were from last year to the previous year.
You're right. They were tips. They weren't just hit me in the chest, go to the ground.
So Auburn pass catchers had 19 drops last year, according to PFF. They had 20 drops the year prior.
Wow. So only one less. That's surprising.
It certainly doesn't feel that way, but
it didn't feel that way. Okay.
So there you go. Does that surprise you? Let us know.
Very. Yeah.
Malcolm Simmons.
Mm-hmm.
So the Eric Singleton, being asked to be the number one, and Auburn may have 2 number ones. We'll see exactly what that looks like between him and Cam Coleman. But how Malcolm fits into the offense with Eric Singleton, I do think is going to be one of the things I'm most excited to see in spring. And then also just kind of hear over, fall camp and all of that over the course of the offseason, because I do think they're really similar. I think they're really similar as far as how they create space and how they've been used at different places. Malcolm Simmons is going to be in a different system unless, we got less film on him versus Singleton and what he did at Georgia Tech for the last 2 seasons. But I do think they're similar. And you don't typically see a bunch of those guys on the field at the same time, but I think you have to play them both a ton. So I can't wait to see what exactly that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if he's your third wide receiver in a 3 wide receiver set, or you go 4 wides and get Horatio Fields on the field as well. I mean, you forget about that. That's going to be very dangerous, very dynamic, because again, you can stretch the field.
Who do you put at slot in the 4 if you go 4 wide? Horatio or Singleton?
I'd put Singleton in the slot.
Okay, just want to remind people, even though Horatio is massive, he played a decent amount of slot at Wake last year. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a nice problem to have, and it could.
What if I had told you 365 days ago, I said, hey, we're going to talk about a year from now, we're going to talk about Auburn having 2 of the best returning receivers in college football. And you mention Auburn going 4 wide and Perry Thompson's not in there.
Shocking. Would be shocked. Absolutely shocked.
It's crazy.
Of course, at that point, KLS, a year ago, KLS wasn't there. So and we didn't see the 2, we would have known Eric Singleton and Horatio Fields would have transferred. And everybody assumed Perry Thompson was going to go ahead of Malcolm Simmons in the pecking order, right?
I did.
Even Bryce Cain. I mean, some people had Bryce Cain going ahead of Simmons. And,
I probably did that too.
I saw this kid play against Wetumpka High School, and I was like, man, he was a 4-star. And I thought, this kid's underrated. Mm-hmm. But he matured as the season went on too, and did some great things. I'm very excited to watch the 3-headed monster at receiver.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait to see how they configure all of that this offseason. All right, the Auburn Tigers look to stay red hot as they host the Arkansas Razorbacks this evening. What do they need to do? What do we want to see? That's next right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at Alumni Hall. Darrell, can you imagine buying any Auburn gear anywhere else other than Alumni Hall?
It's the place to go, man, whether online or in person.
That's right. That's right. Online at alumnihall.com. In person, they've got 3 great physical locations in Auburn, Opelika, and Huntsville. Darrell, last week, took the fam to the Alumni Hall in Opelika, the Tigertown location. We got stocked up on our Auburn baseball gear for the season. And I know that you have bought stuff from family members to for yourself. I mean, for everybody over at Alumni Hall. And we highly, highly, highly recommend it that you do it for yourself and your family as well. Once again, online, alumnihall.com, or 3 physical locations in Auburn, Opelika, and Huntsville. This is Locked On Auburn. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single day. Just can't stress it enough. Auburn took down Alabama this past Saturday, 1-2, the biggest win, I think, in regular season history for the Auburn Tigers. They've got to come back down to earth. They've got to come back down to earth. And, I asked you and Ben this question when we were doing the live post-game reaction there. And I don't think this is going to happen, but I'm asking the question, euphoric high on Saturday, super fun, celebrate it. Then you've got to play a tricky team. I don't think Arkansas is a bad team. I think they're better than what their record in conference play is, certainly, especially since the Kentucky win. You can't let your foot off the gas. And Jedi Broom said all the right things. He was asked about it after the game, and he said, yeah, we'll celebrate, but we got to focus on Arkansas on Wednesday. So he said the right things. I mean, you hope that they do that. And if they do that, Auburn should win this game handily.
Realistically, there is going to be somewhat of a little bit of an emotional letdown. You cannot get around that. It doesn't mean that it can be fatalistic or it's too much. Arkansas is a dangerous team because they're talented. Mm-hmm. Individually, they have some players. Now, they haven't been playing well as a unit, but individually, they have some guys. Calipari is dangerous. he is really, really dangerous and good in this role where people don't give his teams a shot, or he's expected to lose, or he's the underdog. Remember, last year, game day came to Auburn. Auburn was favored over Kentucky. Kentucky walked away on Auburn's home floor and beat them. And Calipari really kind of reveled in that and was very smirkish about it in his post-game press conference and loved it and took some shots. So if you're Bruce Pearl, all you have to do is show film of Arkansas beating Kentucky when nobody gave them a chance in Rupp earlier this year.
Yep.
And go back and show on a loop what Calipari had to say after Kentucky came into Auburn and beat Auburn last year. So that gets their attention. There is going to be there has to be, because that game, especially on the road, and the emotion and the intensity. I like the fact that this game is being played at home.
Sure.
Because the crowd sometimes wills you back in it from an emotion standpoint. You should not have to do that as a college athlete, but let's be honest, an electric crowd can get you back to the level of focus and intensity. I think that it's going to be a little bit of a residual effect, a little bit of a hangover effect. I don't think it lasts for very long. I think Arkansas probably gets Auburn's attention during the game. Now, if Auburn comes out and has some of the starts that they've had, especially at home, and gets out to a 14-4 lead, 16, that's going to be crucial, because it'll set the tone that they are locked in. So, yeah, I expect a little bit of a residual effect, but I don't think I think they'll get that corrected, and I think they'll play well because they know what's at stake.
Have you seen the line yet?
I have not. If I had to guess, it's probably too high.
It's way higher than I would have guessed.
Is it 14?
It's 16.5.
That's way too high. That's to me, that's ludicrous.
That's a lot of points.
Because Arkansas has played a lot better as of late. I mean, Arkansas, I know, was at home, but was within 5 of Alabama.
I think they lost by 4.
Yeah.
They lost by 4. Yeah.
They beat Kentucky, and then they beat somebody right after Kentucky. And I'm trying to remember who that was, but
they've beaten Georgia recently. They beat LSU recently. They lost to A&M.
Yeah. There was somebody I thought they beat after Kentucky that wasn't a bad team, but maybe it was just Georgia. But they played better. And that's the good thing, is that it's going to get Auburn's attention because Texas.
So since Kentucky, and note they lost to Oklahoma, who I don't think is very good, in Bud Walton, but they beat Kentucky in Lexington. They go to Austin and win in Texas. They lose by 4 at home against Bama. They blow out a bad LSU team, and then they lost by 8 on the road to Texas A&M.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's not a bad stretch there. I mean, obviously, that they lost to Alabama and A&M, 2 of the top 4 teams in the conference. Mm-hmm. You're playing in Auburn, which should make a difference. They're different than they are Bud Walton, Arkansas is. So we'll see. But I think that Bruce Pearl will be crafty enough and sly enough to get their attention somehow.
I think so too. I think this is 80 to 68 type game, 80 to 70 type game, if I had to pick.
Arkansas's got some length at the guard position, but they're very, very skinny and lean. I mean, Boogie Flan is lean. The Davis kid from FAU is really good guard. Mark Sears is going to have Jonell Davis. Mark Sears is going to have Mark Sears. Denver Jones is going to have his hands full staying in front of him. I was thinking about how he did a good job on Sears. Broome should have a big advantage down low, though. The big foreign kid is slow-footed. He's tall, but I think Broome should be able to work him on the block. So with his quickness. But Arkansas can get out in transition. They're athletic. That's what Auburn has to be careful. Auburn cannot get lax on the boards. They should have a size advantage. Don't fall in love with the 3. Let Broome and Chaney and Dillon go to work down low, and they should be fine.
Yeah, I think so too. To me, it's just, don't put yourself in a rough situation the first 10 minutes, and I think you'll be okay. I think that's what it comes down to.
Yep.
I think it's what it comes down to. So, Darrell, how can people check out everything that you've got going on?
Socials, you can follow me, Dap6410 on X, Darrell Dapp on Instagram. I'm with you twice a week, and then we'll go live tonight right after the game.
That's right. That's right. We'll be up very, very late. If you have a hard time sleeping after these late tips, come hang out with us for a little bit. We'd love to have you. Please like the video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening on audio, whether it's iTunes or Spotify or whatever app it is, please subscribe there and leave a review. It helps the show out a ton. We'll see you next time. This has been Locked On Auburn.